Hello, Amy. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is so fun. I say this over and over that one of the things that has been so fun about podcasting before the pandemic to during is that it just feels like, I mean, listenership is incredibly high. There's people more now than ever listening and listening and listening to podcasts because I think we're all just like jumping into a new world. But you are all the way over in Philadelphia, and I'm in Canada, and we get to connect and still see commonalities in our stories and our journeys. And that is my favorite part about this today.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that we get to talk today.
Awesome. So I would love to hear. So, for my listeners who have not had the pleasure of hearing about Printfresh and just looking at the amazing products that you guys offer and just such fun, bold, whimsical patterns and things, it's like candy for the eyes, is what I feel like it is. I would love to hear about just you, yourself, and your background and how you got started on this journey.
Yeah, of course. So I've always loved fashion ever since I was young. And I grew up knowing that I definitely wanted to work in fashion design and always loved fabric. And then I ended up studying textiles in college. And I interned a lot in fashion and in the art world and worked for large fashion companies and ended up starting a textile design studio where I was selling patterns to the fashion industry for the last 15 years. But about 5 years ago, I decided that I wanted to come up with some ideas of what it would look like to start our own line. And then that's kind of how we ended up getting into pajamas.
That is so cool. I think I love hearing stories about how you were in something, not that it was so different, but in something in one way, and then were able to imagine and evolve and dream about seeing things similarly, but in a different way that sort of suits you and where you see your life going, rather than thinking, oh, where I've started from is exactly where I need to keep staying.
Right. It was just kind of this long, natural transition, over the course of 15 years, kind of learning different things. And it ended up evolving. And there were lots of bumps along the
Of
way.
course.
So many, things like we initially started making stationery, which you would think the two things like pajamas and stationery don't really go together in some ways. But that was one of the first things that we started designing as we started to explore different items. And the stationery was lovely. It was covered in fabric and it kind of ended up bringing us to where we are today. But, we were going to India to work on the products there and really got to know a lot of different factories and made connections there. And so it kind of all it was a very slow evolution, but it all kind of started to move in the direction of fashion and doing pajamas.
Well, I love that you said that because I think that as entrepreneurs and dreamers, and I mean, I know for myself that I always have so many ideas floating through my head. With my background is event planning and marketing, and it's like every single thing that I do, see, eat, walk by, see on TV is always like, oh, but what about this? What about this? There's like so much inspiration I feel around me all of the time that I'm constantly gleaning from, that I think sometimes we almost can get in our own head and feel like we have to sort of know the answer of what the end result is going to be before just like getting started on something.
Yeah, and it can be such an obstacle sometimes having too much of a linear plan.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I love that you shared that about the stationery, because I think sometimes too, it's easy to only share the parts that worked.
Yeah,
Like it's easy when
exactly.
we're looking on somebody's Instagram, or we're looking on somebody's website, or wherever we're seeing somebody's business journey, we're only getting these tiny little snippets of what's actually come to fruition. We're not necessarily seeing all of these steps of things that probably for yourself, there's a million things where you're like, oh man, if I had just been able to like navigate this or whatever, this wouldn't have had to be as complicated or hard, but it's all of those little things that add up to getting to you to a place today where you have this cool company doing what you wanted to do, but didn't quite see that at the very beginning.
Yeah, there's so much, I think, information around overnight success. And I think that is, that's great on social media or something. But in reality, we've all had so many twists and turns. We like designed pouches and candles and greeting cards. We tried so many different things, and all of them came out very nicely, but it wasn't the thing that really was enough to build a business around. So just all those experimentations along the way and playing with different things, I think kind of leads you to what actually works, but it takes a tremendous amount of time.
Totally. Nobody's filming their like fetal position crying in the bathroom many times a week.
There's so many emotions that happen on a daily basis.
Totally. So how did you finally land on pajamas? How did this finally come to a place? What made this stick versus the other products and things that you had tried before?
Yeah, so it had just been, we kept on trying different things and trying to figure out like what worked, and it was a long process. And then we just kind of kept on coming back to the idea of pajamas, and I kept on thinking like maybe that's something that would work. I love comfortable clothing, and it seemed like a good fit just because of loving things that are just so easy to wear. And we were traveling to India twice a year, and we spend a significant amount of time there when we're there. And we had these beautiful patterns on some journals that just looked bizarre on a journal. Like it just didn't work at all. Like I kept on pulling them out all the time. I'd hang them on the wall and I'd be like, oh, like I wish that this could work. It just doesn't look right. And then it didn't seem like it would work on a dress or anything like that. And then we were like, well, why don't we just try it on a pajama? And on a trip to India, we got to the factory and we saw the samples made up, and we were like, oh my gosh, this looks amazing. And it was just this thing that, I mean, like, I can't believe, like, I think back to it. I'm like, what if I never thought to try it? Like, what if it just always stayed as this like strange journal that I kept on batting around? And once we saw it made up and tried on the clothing and the pajamas, it looked so great. And that was like where we realized that was something for us to try to focus on.
Well, and don't you find too, I feel like this is another, and I know I have experienced this and continue to kind of ebb and flow through this process of just finding the actual niche. And I feel like that is such a overused term these days, but to feel like there's always, I think, this tendency to think, well, we need to have more things in order to appeal to more people. And we need to have this, and this product if you're a product based business, or this service, this service, this service. And when you actually are able to niche down into just obviously lots of variety within that one product, but that product is how people know you now, right? Like they're not like, oh man, shoot, I thought you had a journal line.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. And it's funny. So many times people are like, "Oh, well, what's next?" And I'm like, "Oh, but I'm really happy with what I'm doing." And we kind of, after trying so many things, now we're in the space where we've found that right connection of like what we're passionate about and the right product, and it suits our talents and our love of pattern. And there's so many things that we're just building on with that, and different things to kind of create like more nuance to it that aligns with our values. Things like, as soon as we realized that the pajamas were working, we were like, okay, we've got to figure out a way to do this in organic. So we spent like a year figuring out that, but like we finally kind of come to a place where we're really focusing in on something, and it's really an amazing experience to just really focus.
I love that. Well, there is something to be said about, it's all fun to dream things up and to like kind of work on getting your processes and systems and things on a go, but that is exhausting. Like it's exhausting to feel like you're always in a place. And I don't know that that ever really ends as an entrepreneur. You're sort of always wanting to be better than you were yesterday, even if it means you're doing things very similarly, but you're wanting to make sure everything's running how it should be. But I can imagine that there's this feeling of like, once you've hit what feels is working, to be like, Okay. We can spend our energies on like making this as great as it can be. We don't have to be spending our energies on just always trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's so easy to try to go in so many different directions. And my business partner, who's also my husband, we work together, and he always has a million ideas for different things. I'm like, no, no, no. I think like we have to like stay where there's kind of this ease for us, and like where it's
Mhm.
just working.
There's a whole nother podcast episode, being business partners with your significant other.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
I'm sure. Haven't experienced it for myself. Hope I never do. So where do you find, like when you saw this pattern on pajamas for the first time and we're like, oh wow, yeah, that works. Where do you continuously find your inspiration when coming up with new patterns and designs in your pajama line?
Yeah, I would say it's a very intuitive process. We're usually designing very far ahead, like usually about a year in advance. So we have a lot of time to kind of like think through ideas. But a lot of our inspiration is based on plants and animals. So I'm always kind of thinking about different combinations of those two things. And it might just be something that I might see if I'm in an antique shop. I might see a ceramic dog or some sort
Mhm.
of like palm tree art, or just something that might trigger different ideas. And some of it's kind of also just based on different things in my life. We were raising guinea hens for a little while. And so we have a guinea hen print that we're working on. Hopefully we can pull it together. But you know, different things like that. It's just really fun. And a lot of it's also based on our travels and wildlife that we see when we're traveling.
I love that. Well, I feel the same way. I feel like when you have that creative spark in your mind, it's hard to go really anywhere and not be gleaning something. Like there's times where I'm like ordering food in a restaurant, even just the way their like menu is laid out or the decor that's in there or something. I'm like, oh, wait, I could do this. And it's like I have to just like make a note of it or take a picture of it because I'm like, this is just like something I've never seen before. This is triggering something in my mind that is like making me think of something else.
Yeah, my cell phone is just full of the strangest photographs and random things. I look at it, you know, I always want to have all these beautiful photos like on my cell phone, but instead it's just these little snippets of things that I find, or it could be anything really when I'm out and about or in nature or shopping or something. Like you find inspiration everywhere.
Totally. It's like your camera roll is just like an unorganized version of Pinterest,
Yes, a little less curated.
except less curated. Totally. I feel the same way. So I would imagine that you've referenced sort of going to India a couple times a year and the people that you work with there. And how did your sort of ethical and sustainable manufacturing process how did you, I guess, get started in the first place? Because to me, like I have never been in any type of um like production or textile specifically or any type of manufacturing industry where that's been a part of what I've had to do for my business. And so that is so interesting to me to think like, how do you even begin figuring this out when you're like, hey, let's make pajamas? Like, where does this even, and I'm sure a lot of my listeners can relate to this, like, how do you even start that process, let alone sourcing this and figuring out how whom you're working with across the world is able to kind of work with what your vision is for your project, and how do you include them in being, obviously they're a huge part to the success of this all working.
Right. Yeah. It's a very daunting process. And it just took a lot of time. And I think that being patient is incredibly important to finding the right partners. So because we had started the stationery line, I was spending about 40 days a year in India. So I had a lot of time to meet with people, and a lot of the factories had connections to other people, and I was able to kind of build a network and meet with a lot of factories that also happened to do apparel. And I had a women's clothing line that was much smaller than what we're doing now, but I got to meet some factories there. And I got to really understand the values behind their companies. And I wanted to find somebody who really shared the same level of commitment to the environment and ethics in their manufacturing. So I got to spend a lot of time working in the factories, understanding what was going on there, looking for the right fit. So the factory that we work with now is amazing. It's solar powered, all the water is recycled. In the printing facility, they're connected to a pipeline where all of the water can be reused. So that's, it takes time to find that. That's not something that happens overnight.
Wow. So I mean, especially during COVID, I'm sure this has added some different challenges to your business with not being able to travel and that kind of thing as conveniently. But how do you find that you stay connected with them and actually get to feel like they are a part of your team, even though you kind of are working in different parts of the world and on different parts of the business? How do you stay connected?
Well, thank goodness for WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So using that as a method of communication is pretty much like how we run our business these days. So one of my dear friends who helps us in the factories in Jaipur, I mean, he's probably the person that I text message the most in my life. And I mean, like and the time zone change like definitely makes things difficult, but every night and every morning, him and I are messaging back and forth. He's showing me pictures, videos, we're calling each other. So there's a lot of communication that's happening. So we feel very connected. It's definitely a lot more fun to be there in person, but we're kind of making it work. And luckily we had a relationship for like many years working there. So
Yes.
it's easier than trying to start from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so amazing. So, what would you say, like, even right now with the way things were when you started your business versus today, you said 5 years later, like where we're at now with this lines, like, how do you find your um even just promoting yourself and like where you guys are showing up and how you're staying current? How has that changed from where you started and what was sort of possible prior to even just in the last year before the pandemic to where we are now with how business has just had to evolve at lightning speed in order to be able to figure out how to um, stay in the game? I recognize obviously e-commerce and being able to do everything online does keep a lot of things the same, but I would imagine you guys would have been popping up and being in different places that maybe just isn't happening right now.
Yeah, everything changed in March of last year. Like we had to completely restructure how we were doing our business. So we used to do trade shows and like work with a sales agent. So everything was in person. It was these giant trade shows in the Javits Center in New York
Mhm.
and different trade shows in Los Angeles. And it was so much in-person selling. And we were selling to small boutiques and some major retailers. And all of that came to an end because so many of the stores were shut down for a while, orders were canceled. So, we really had to say to ourselves, like, what are we going to do? Because we knew we had a great product. We just had to figure out how to keep the business alive and how to make it thrive in this really incredibly challenging time. And things,
Yeah.
like weren't necessarily easy, like at home, like the kids, like were all of a sudden, like I was trying to homeschool them, but then also trying to run a
Mhm.
business. I mean, it was pretty incredible how we had to work together to make it work. So we had to learn a tremendous amount of things about marketing that I've never known about before, learning how to improve our website, how to advertise on social media, all things that we had never done before. And
Wow.
it was an incredible journey. And also our entire team, we have a small team, but all five of us were working from home and trying to do this safely. And it was incredibly challenging.
Yeah, things that you could never have been prepared for. I think that's like one of the blessings in all of this is that when I look around, knowing that it wasn't just one city or one part of the world or one area. everybody. So there wasn't really this like, oh, wow, if only we were here, or if only we were here.
I know, you couldn't just relocate. It
Right?
was just challenging no matter where you went.
That's right. And there was like something that was like, I mean, kind of depressing about that, to be honest, but there's also something that sort of has felt very unifying about that in a weird way, where it's like, okay, we are all in this together. We really are. This is like one of the only things I can think of in my entire existence that has been a worldwide, this is what's happening, I think, for most of us. And I think the good things that have come out of it have been pretty spectacular, even though there have been a lot of unbelievably hard and unfortunate things as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what would you say for yourself? I know probably different from a year ago than to now, but what would you say right now is sort of a typical day in the life for you as a business owner and having a family and trying to run everything? I think again, those are pieces that are sometimes. I know for myself, life feels so full a lot of the times that there's things that I like wish to sometimes document to be like, hey, this is actually what life looks like doing this, but I don't actually have the time to document this to show you how it's going to look.
I know. I feel like I really should be documenting it just for years from now to look back on and be like, what were we doing?
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, every day is a little bit bizarre. And like I mentioned, like my team's working remotely. My husband and I work together, so it's very hectic in our house. Our kids are going to school twice a week, so trying to keep track of their schedule and trying to, on the other days, help them with Zoom meetings while we're in our own Zoom meetings, and trying to coordinate that and the housework and like cook all these meals. Like I've never cooked so much in my
I know,
life.
like, is everybody just eating like 10,000 calories more a day than necessary? Because that's how I feel too. It's just the eating and eating and eating and eating, making meals nonstop.
Yeah, we run the dishwasher, I think, at least 3 times a day. And
Seriously.
like, I just look at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I have to unload that thing one more time
Honestly.
during a meeting, like, and I'm clanking around in the background. And, oh gosh, it's ridiculous. That and the laundry. I've never done so much laundry in my life. But to balance that all out, I definitely try to take time in my morning to kind of like start the day off right. Like I try to have a little bit of like calm and balance in there. So I try to get my coffee before everyone wakes up so that I can just have a little bit of quiet time to myself. And then I'll try to do like some short yoga, stretching videos, or like some sort of mat workout to kind of clear my head and start things off on the right day. But then the rest of the day is typically Zoom meetings with a team or working on upcoming seasons or different brand collaborations.
That's amazing. Yeah, I agree with you with like wanting to record it just to be able to look back. Cause I think there's times I feel that even in other seasons when I look back to, my kids aren't as little. They're still little, but they're not as little anymore. And, looking back to the season of when they were still in the like toddler days and the younger days where I'm like, oh my word, like I don't even actually know how this all worked, but somehow the world is still spinning and we made it through that season, you know?
Yeah, it's incredibly challenging.
Oh goodness. So you also, besides having your product, you also have such inspiring information and articles in your Printfresh magazine that you have like online articles and just things like conscious living and design and DIY and like health, wellness, travel, all of the things that sort of just fit into exactly what we're talking about with just how to kind of make our lives the best that they can be. And tell me about that. Like, tell me how you guys sort of how you've added on to the side of your business where you're kind of trying to inspire people as a whole versus just the focusing of selling your beautiful pajamas.
Right. I think that all brands like have a choice. They can just be very product driven and, it's just about that. Or you can be a brand that has a kind of a sense of purpose and a voice. And one of the ways that I got my start in the fashion industry was I used to have a fashion blog forever ago. And I loved it so much. And then I kind of gave it up because other things kind of seemed like bigger opportunities. And it was one of those things that, I mean, I regretted it for probably like a decade. And then I had to say,
Oh,
I said to myself, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I can totally just start this up again. And so we kind of started last year with having a component that was a blog on there, and it was featuring different women. And I just loved hearing women's stories and getting the chance to interview them and hear their stories of entrepreneurship and their challenges and successes in their own words. And we started to realize, it was such a fun experience to connect with all of these women. So a lot of the stories that you'll see on there are interviews. And we're just kind of trying to like add a little bit more about the lifestyle that we want, or that we're interested in, trying out different things or exploring different topics about health, mental wellness, just DIY projects, all sorts of things.
I love that. Well, and I mean, even just like the images and the things that you use on these articles are just so reflective of even just scrolling through your Instagram feed, where it's just these whimsical, bold, beautiful, bright patterns that are just happy. They're just so happy.
Yeah, that's a big part of our process, because when we look at the patterns, when we're evaluating them and designing them, like if it doesn't make me happy, like if it doesn't give my soul that charge, like we just don't do it. Like it's all about the color and the pattern, and it's just so amazing to be able to put something together that just uplifts a person when they're wearing it.
Hmm, totally. And I don't think that many of us probably really realize how much that affects us. Like, I know for myself, my space and around me, and I think all of us are probably realizing this too, because we've been spending so much time in our homes, more so than we maybe would have before. I think you just notice the way that the room and the environment that you're in and the energy that it has and the furniture and just the look and whatever is in there. And it doesn't matter whether it's like, I'm not saying it has to be perfectly stylized. I'm just saying, in order to sort of figure out what makes your soul happy, what does a room need to feel like in order to feel good in. And I think sometimes I think about that from a design perspective, but I think you're so right. Like, that really is sort of a part of our like fashion and our wardrobe, all the way down to our pajamas. Like, if we're just like lounging around, which I laugh because I'm like, wow, I hope you've probably seen sales really increase this year, because I would imagine a lot of us have spent a lot more time in our pajamas.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a tremendous amount of growth, because I think that we all want to shop. We all want to treat ourselves in some special way. And, kind of week 3 into staying at home, I think all of us kind of evaluated, okay, like what will we be wearing?
Yeah, totally. I guess these old ratty college sweatpants are just not really working for me anymore. Maybe I can do better.
Yeah. And I think that like as we're like all in our homes, but on Zoom calls and all these different things, it's just so much more fun to be wearing something unusual, but still comfortable.
100%. Totally. Well, and I think for anybody that's going to scroll through the Printfresh Instagram after this, like, just get ready for your eyes to be wowed, because that is exactly it, where it's like, this can be um, beautiful and functional at the same time. And they are just so adorable. So here will be a hard question for you. What would you say has been one of the favorite patterns that you and your team have ever created?
I would say that it's definitely the Bagheera leopard pattern.
Mm,
That's definitely our favorite. So it was from our first collection, but it's definitely become our iconic pattern. It's this unusual leopard that has kind of fangs and claws, and it's incredibly fierce. And it's just so bold and fun. And yeah, that's the one that I wear all the time. And we have it in a couple different colors.
I love it. I love it. Now, like, now my eyes are going to start going to that, because it's, yeah, I find it so interesting. Just, I would have never looking through all of the stuff that you've created and all of the different patterns, like there's definitely, you can see that there is like I said, this like boldness to them. Like there's definitely a theme in that. Yet when you look at the pattern of every single one, they are so unique and different and have just such like different pieces to it. And yet they're like feminine, yet they're not like, they're not just like pink and pretty. Like you would think everything feminine is often labeled.
Yeah,
There's
there's a
like,
lot of like very pretty sleepwear out there in the market. And like I don't have anything to add to that. There's already enough out there. So we wanted to really make something that was quirky and unusual and fun. And all these animals have just such personalities to them.
totally. So if you could, based on the types of articles that you guys are sharing in the Printfresh mag and on your Instagram and everything that you're sharing around, what would you say right now would be something that you want women to hear and to know in order for them to feel inspired in their life?
Yeah, I think so much about what we're writing about is just highlighting a variety of women. I think that especially in the sleepwear market, and with intimates, we get this this view of women and how we're supposed to look that just is just not it doesn't sit with me well. And I think that we have this opportunity to showcase so many different forms of beauty and different voices, and it's been incredible being able to work with so many different women.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think there's always I think it's easy sometimes to get, like, I know for myself as a business owner, it's sometimes easy to get overwhelmed in looking at what is all going on around us and thinking, well, there's so much information out there and there's so much going on. What could I possibly share and do that hasn't already been done, seen, or heard, or that isn't going to just add to the clutter that's already out there? But I think what I've learned, especially even just from this podcast, is there's always something of a different perspective. There's always somebody who is maybe in a different space to hear something today that maybe they weren't wanting to hear a week ago, or just a new perspective on something, or a story that somebody listening to was like, oh my goodness, like I feel that way too. This connects with me. This has now made me feel like I'm not alone because I'm hearing somebody else share a struggle or something that's going on in their own life.
Yeah, and a lot of what we write about is about inclusive sizing in fashion. And we have a
Mm,
great article coming up with Sean Taylor. She was on The Circle. I don't know if you've seen that show. And
mhm,
I mean, reading her interview answers, I mean, it just gave me the chills. Just
mm.
hearing such thought-provoking ideas on fashion and size inclusion. I think that you'll really enjoy that one.
That's amazing. I can't wait. That sounds fabulous. I love, that is my favorite. That is my favorite piece. I find for myself whenever just like your business, as I stumbled upon your beautiful business just because of an Instagram post that I saw. Um, I always love, that's my favorite part about stumbling upon new businesses, is being able, I always jump to the sort of about section first. Hearing the story as to the why of it all is always my favorite part before even really diving. I mean, obviously images, when you're catching up with something for the first time on Instagram, obviously it's the images generally that sort of catch your eye initially. But then to take a couple clicks and dig further to read the story, that's always just the best for me, to just to hear the inspiration as to why somebody feels passionate about it, and why, usually more than not, something that has happened to them in their life, whether it be positive or negative, has sort of led to taking the steps to either decide to create something new, or to boldly bring themselves into the world of starting a business because they noticed something was missing, or they heard somebody else's story saying like, hey, this doesn't exist, this would really be amazing if it did.
The about page is always the hardest one to write. That's the one that we we keep going back to it every month. We're like, oh, like should we add this? Should we add that? It's really hard to sum it all up.
Totally. Well, yours is lovely and I enjoyed reading it.
Oh, good. That's nice to hear.
So Before we wrap up the interview, I always like to ask the guests the same question each week because just like we were saying, it's so fun to sort of hear. I think sometimes, especially maybe more so in product-based businesses, you're like pushing out these products and you have these amazing stories about the products and stuff, but you actually don't always get to know the people or the owners behind. I know it's like easier to like feature the team than it is to kind of feature yourself as the owner of something. But I love to sort of just hear the real life stories. And I appreciated you even just sort of sharing a little bit about what your day looks like and how that starts for you, because I think those little pieces of information are so helpful as we all, as women, are trying to just sort of do a lot of things each day and are feeling this sense of, well, we should do this and we should do that and we should do that. And just letting ourselves figure out for ourselves by seeing the ways that other women are able to show up, and just to give ourselves permission to like make it work for ourselves. So I have a few lightning questions that I'm going to ask you. You ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
What book are you currently reading?
I'm reading The Henna Artist.
Oh, what's that about?
It's so good. The writing style, it's like this beautiful imagery. It's amazing. So it's about a very talented henna artist in Jaipur in the 1950s. And it's at this time like where Indian society is kind of shifting from very traditional to modern. And it's so beautifully written.
Wow.
So I'm early on in the book. I can't tell you too much about it yet, but I highly recommend it from what I've read so far.
Good. I love new book recommendations. I haven't heard of this one. This is great. Okay, so you said you're a coffee drinker. What is your coffee order if you're at home or out and about?
Latte with regular sugar. I feel guilty every time I put it in there. I know I should be using something that's not so processed, but it's my one indulgence. I love it that
you just own it. You just need to own this. Be like, don't give me any of that fake sugar. We're just going all in because that's what I like. I love it. Currently, right now, what would you say would be the theme song for your life?
Oh, I wish I had a theme song for my life. I really do. I don't know. I feel like I don't have one, but I would like to have one. My kids cannot stand the music I listen to. We just can never figure it out. Like they always want to listen to like Jojo Siwa or something. Right. So there's a lot of friction around music right now. And I mostly, like, anytime I get time alone, I'm listening to audiobooks instead. So yeah, I don't think I have a theme song yet.
You know what? I'm the same way. Like, I love music, but I feel like, and this is a bit of a point of contention in my home too, with my family, is that I'm more of if I'm trying to unwind, it needs to be quiet. Like I wouldn't put on music to unwind. I like listening to music and I enjoy listening to music, but if there's like too much stuff going on in my head, music feels like another person talking.
Yeah, silence is such a treat these days.
Which maybe is telling us something else about our lives, that maybe we need to figure out how to have more quiet in our day versus me getting triggered when somebody turns music on. What is your favorite junk food?
I don't eat a lot of junk food or processed food, but I do have a little treat that I make myself every week. So it's like these peanut butter oat balls that I put in like chocolate or pistachios and cranberries. So like I don't kind of all those like little like sweet snacks. I kind of roll it all into one. Every week they kind of taste different for whatever reason. But that's my go-to treat.
I love it. I do the exact same thing. And sometimes I make them in like little round ball form. And sometimes I like actually, if I'm like using dates or something in them, I'll like press them into a pan and make them like a bar. And even the identical ingredients shaped in a different shape, I'm like, oh, wow, these taste so different.
Oh my gosh, I've never even thought to do them in a different shape. I'm going to try that this week.
You can. And then I put them in just like, I do them in just like one recipe. So it just makes like a little like 8x8, just like square pan or whatever. And then I cut them into just like the size of like a granola bar, I guess, but they're just like flat. And then I wrap them up and put them into the freezer. And then I can just always like have one out. And because they're like thinner, they take like, they're good frozen, but they also take like 1 second to just thaw, and they are so yummy. And then you feel like you have a completely different treat.
Oh, I never thought to freeze them. I'm learning so much today.
You are really going to up your energy ball game here today. Oh, I love it. When was the last time that you belly laughed, and what were you laughing at?
I would say my daughter is always cracking me up. She has the funniest sense of humor and like amazing comedic timing. And I don't know where she gets it, because my husband and I are not particularly funny, but she just has this way about her. And it snowed here the other week, and it doesn't typically snow here too much. And we had a really fun snowball fight with our friends that just moved down here. And it was just so incredibly fun and unexpected. So there was a lot of laughter that day.
Oh, that is the best. I love it when you feel like, don't you find, I've talked about this quite a bit actually recently, that as we all get older, it feels like, and I think, like you said, we sort of see this more in our children who still have that sense of lots of things are funny, like life is easy going. They just don't have like the adults like sense of stress that we sort of allow to come upon ourselves, where it often can feel like life feels heavier. And it's just so fun when a moment happens where you're like, oh my goodness, like I actually felt lost in the moment, rather than feeling like I was like analyzing a situation or feeling like I couldn't be fully present, or, you know.
Yeah, just that heartfelt sense. It's
Yeah.
so good.
I love it. Okay, last but not least, where is the destination that you are most looking forward to traveling to once things aren't quite the way that they are right now?
I definitely need to go back to India right away. Before the pandemic, we had plans to go to Goa, which I had never been to before. And we were going to stay in a coconut hut, which
Come
seemed
on.
so fun. So that is the first thing I want to do when I can travel again, is
Oh,
go on that trip.
my word. I have never even heard. I've traveled quite a bit, but I have not heard of a coconut hut.
It was so cute. Yeah, it's adorable. So
Well,
that's my dream.
you know what? That is a beautiful thing to be dreaming about these days. Amy, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was so lovely hearing your story and just all of the cool things that you are doing in your business. And go follow Printfresh on Instagram and check out their blog and just all of the cool things that they are doing. And get yourself a pair of pajamas. I am excited to get myself a pair and try out these bold prints and see if it makes me feel better.
Thank you so much for having me today.